Every year, more places loosen their marijuana laws. Instead of asking whether that trend will continue, it's worth asking a harder question. What actually happens, physically and socially, once a banned plant becomes a regulated product? The honest answer involves an arms race, a policy paradox, a couple of national experiments, and a comparison most people would rather not make. Start with the arms race. Marijuana sold today is not the same product it was 2 generations ago. Breeders have spent decades selecting for one thing, a stronger high, delivered by higher concentrations of THC. It's not unlike what happened to beer during the craft brewing boom, except in reverse, where instead of chasing flavor, growers were chasing intensity. And the compound that got squeezed out along the way, CBD, happens to be the one that tends to soften THC's harsher psychological effects and shows early promise as a treatment for anxiety and psychotic symptoms. A weaker, more balanced product doesn't sell as well in a market built on getting people as high as possible, so it quietly disappeared from most commercial strains. This matters because there's a reasonably consistent research signal linking heavy use of high THC marijuana to psychotic episodes, particularly in people who already carry some underlying vulnerability. But vulnerability is the key word. The clearest way to think about it isn't marijuana causes psychosis. It's closer to a dose and vulnerability model. For most people, even heavy use carries a fairly small absolute risk, while for a smaller group with existing predisposition, potent marijuana appears to act as an accelerant, pulling forward a psychotic episode that other stressors might have triggered eventually anyway. That distinction rarely survives being summarized in a headline. Here's the paradox. Prohibition may be partly responsible for the very potency it's trying to suppress. Economists call it the iron law of prohibition, and you can see it playing out in real time in the opioid crisis, where crackdowns on prescription pills and heroin pushed illegal suppliers toward fentanyl, a synthetic opioid so potent that a shipment small enough to hide in a pocket can be worth more than a suitcase full of a weaker drug. Concentrated products are easier to smuggle, easier to disguise, and more profitable per unit. Marijuana has followed a milder version of the same logic. When a market operates entirely outside regulation, there's no mechanism pushing potency back down, no labeling, no dosage standardization, nothing resembling the difference between reaching for a light beer versus a shot of grain alcohol. Regulation doesn't eliminate that choice architecture. It's one of the few tools capable of rebuilding it. The second major argument against legalization is the gateway theory that marijuana use leads people toward harder, more dangerous drugs. The overlap between marijuana use and other illegal drug use is real, but sequence matters less than researchers once assumed. A framework called the common liability model suggests that a shared set of underlying vulnerabilities, genetics, early adversity, mental health struggles, unstable environments, predicts who ends up using multiple substances, regardless of which drug came first chronologically. Under that model, marijuana isn't opening a door so much as showing up as one symptom of a broader vulnerability that would likely express itself somehow, with or without cannabis in the picture. That reframing doesn't mean marijuana use is inconsequential, but it does mean that banning one substance in a chain of many rarely addresses whatever is actually driving the escalation. If shared vulnerability, not sequence, is doing the real work, then the policy question shifts from how do we block access to how do we treat the underlying causes. 2 small countries ran very different experiments in answering that. Portugal, facing a severe drug crisis in 2001, decriminalized personal possession of all drugs, marijuana included, and redirected enforcement resources into treatment and harm reduction. Within a decade, continued drug use, HIV transmission, and overdose deaths had all dropped substantially. Uruguay took a more specific route in 2013, becoming the first country to fully legalize and state-regulate the entire marijuana supply chain, from cultivation to retail sale, explicitly to undercut illegal trafficking rather than to expand access. Neither policy eliminated drug-related harm entirely, but both suggest that pulling a substance out of a purely criminal framework tends to produce better public health outcomes than doubling down on enforcement. None of this erases the third argument, which is simply that marijuana carries real health costs. Dependency is real, typically psychological rather than physical, and it affects a meaningful minority of users, a share that climbs as average potency climbs. The honest complication is that marijuana's illegal status has actively slowed research into exactly how harmful it is, creating a strange feedback loop where the drug most in need of rigorous, well-funded study is also the hardest one to study properly, which brings up the comparison most people avoid. In 2010, a UK government drug advisory panel ranked 20 common substances by overall harm to users and to society, weighing addiction potential, physical damage, and social cost together. Alcohol topped the list. Tobacco ranked well above marijuana too. Both are freely available at any corner store, while marijuana remains restricted or banned across much of the world. That ranking doesn't prove marijuana is safe. It proves that the line between legal and illegal drugs was never drawn primarily by evidence of harm. It was drawn by history, culture, and politics. And once a substance lands on one side of that line, actual comparative risk becomes almost irrelevant to how it's regulated. So where does that leave things? Marijuana is not harmless, and nobody serious claims it is. But most of the arguments for keeping it illegal turn out to rest on mechanisms, unchecked potency, shared vulnerability rather than sequence, evidence-starved research, that criminalization tends to make worse rather than better. 2 decades of small-scale national experiments point toward the same conclusion from different directions. Treating a drug problem primarily as a criminal, one rarely shrinks the problem. It mostly just makes it harder to study and harder to fix.